We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 3 as well as Proverbs 1 this morning. If you want to turn with us, I'd suggest the 1 Kings 3 passage. We'll also have all the scriptures up on the screen as we go through. I was on the internet a few months ago when I saw what I thought was one of the funniest examples of our general foolishness as a species. It was this map showing the relative density of Google searches for the exact phrase, "my eyes hurt," during April 2024. Now, there's a very obvious reason why a bunch of people in that exact region of the country might have had hurting eyes in early April 2024. Does anybody have a guess? The eclipse! We were told for months and months on end, don't look straight at the eclipse without glasses on. And do you know what a whole boatload of us did? We looked straight at the eclipse without glasses on and then Googled, why do our eyes hurt? We as human beings are not by nature wise. It is something that we actually do recognize our need for this. We recognize the praiseworthy nature of being wise in our society today. Think of all the kung fu movies out there with young warriors seeking wise masters, or the wise and kind leaders and matriarchs in our movies and books. That's a good thing. Our society knows we need this. But we don't always seem to have much understanding of exactly what it is or how to acquire it. This morning, we're going to dig into how Solomon acquires wisdom in 1 Kings 3 and how he urges others to go seek it in Proverbs 1. And between those two chapters, we're going to answer three questions. Where does wisdom come from? How do we get it? And what happens when we do? So let's start by reading 1 Kings 3, verses 5 through 15. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, "Because you have asked for this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings and made a feast for all his servants. Where does wisdom come from? Any parent can tell you we are not born wise. Whether it's the ridiculous hiding places, the objects stacked precariously in a way that guarantees disaster, the incredibly questionable decisions about what animals to try and make friends with, and whether bite and headbutt them repeatedly is a viable strategy for making said friends. Kids prove to us that there are infinite examples of the ways that we see that wisdom is clearly something that needs to be acquired. So where do we get it from? What is the starting line in the race to become wise? And I think both here in 1 Kings and in Proverbs 1, we find two clear answers. The first is about the source that wisdom flows from. We become wise when we become more connected to, aware of, and in tune with who God is and who we are. John Calvin, one of the intellectual fathers of our branch of Christianity, wrote, "Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. Our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected by many ties, it is not easy to determine which of the two precedes and gives birth to the other." I think this is really interesting because there's a component here that is maybe more intuitive to us as Christians living in our society, and there's maybe a component that is actually misunderstood by, but more intuitively grasped by people who aren't Christians living in our society. Because if I tell you, fellow Christians sitting out there with us this morning, if I tell you we need to know God more in order to become more wise, you would say, duh. Like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. We just get that. But, if I tell you that you need to know yourself more in order to gain wisdom, you might say, ooh, John, that sounds kind of selfish. That sounds kind of like therapy culture. This is a little off here. Maybe we need to go a different direction with this thing. But if we turn it around and I tell you, skeptical but interested friend who's visiting with us this morning, and we're very excited that you're here. If I tell you, hey, you need to get to know yourself better in order to become wise, you would probably tell me, duh, of course I do, John. That's why I've paid for 3 Enneagram tests, rerun my Harry Potter House Selector and Patronus Identification quiz 6 times, and last year I took a self-discovery ayahuasca silence meditation retreat. Our culture gets you need to know yourself better. We're always looking for ourselves, whether it's in the right place or not. But if I tell you, again, skeptical individual, that you need to know God better in order to find wisdom, then I think the world around us would basically go, well, what God? Which God? Where? Or just how outdated? That's silly. That doesn't need to be a part of me becoming more wise. But here in our passage, it takes both. In Proverbs 1:7, our memory verse for this week, we read, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." The words for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding are going to kind of get mixed together throughout Proverbs in order to try to make distinctions between them. This word can also mean wisdom in some places. So this beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. We need to know God better. We need to see Him in His greatness and awe, His power, His might, His majesty. And in 1 Kings 3, verse 7, we found Solomon praying to God, choosing his request, and he said, "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in." Modern paraphrase, God, I don't know how to do any of this. I don't have the answers. I feel like everyone else around me knows what's going on, and I just don't. Solomon doesn't pray for wisdom unless he knows that he lacks it. He needs that understanding of himself in order to go and pursue the wisdom that the Lord has available for him. So he doesn't pursue it unless he knows himself. He knows that he is lacking, but he doesn't find it unless he's talking to a God who is able to give it. We need both to find the right source for wisdom and to see ourselves clearly enough to know that we need to go find it. We need to look in the right place, but also to have the right heart. And as we're talking about having the right heart, the second principle in our passage about where we start with wisdom, where do we start from, is about the motive for looking for wisdom. We become wise out of a desire to love and serve others. Again, a little counterintuitive. Our motives, our desires, our direction in pursuing wisdom matters. Why does Solomon want wisdom? Well, he says, God, I've got all these people that I'm supposed to be leading, and I don't know how to help them. I don't know how to be who they need me to be. I don't know how to know what they need me to know. He wants to serve his people. He wants to lead well. What does Solomon do when he receives a great blessing from the Lord? I included one extra verse beyond what a lot of times gets grouped together here, because it says at the end that he makes a feast for all his servants to celebrate the wisdom that the Lord's given to him. Even in his joy, he wants to share it with the people around him. Solomon is being driven by an others-centric motivation. And far from saying, well, that's nice, but whatever, the Bible actually says, no, this is important. This is a part of how we find wisdom. Having that core, that motive, that desire, it matters. The Bible talks about how people look at the outside, but God looks at our hearts. That's why our motives matter. If we want to be wise because we want to be better than the people around us, if we want to be wise because we want to get ahead in life, if we want to be wise because that's the right thing to do and I always do the right thing, we probably shouldn't expect to get it necessarily. But if we want to be wise out of a knowledge that we are lacking, that God has it, and that we need it in order to serve others, then we're cooking with gas, and it's time for our second question. How do we become wise? If we're seeking it in the right way, in the right place, out of the right motives, how do we find it? And again, I think our passage this morning, both Proverbs 1 and 1 Kings 3, are united in giving us two clear answers. We find it by going to the source over time. By going to the source over time. So let's talk about going to the source. This one shows up in both of those two passages. We already read Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge or wisdom, but we find it in 1 Kings 3 as well. Think about verse 5. Who was it who initiated the conversation with Solomon? God. Who is it of whom Solomon can ask this magnificent gift? God. Verses 11 and 10, again, who is it who grants this wisdom and all the other gifts to Solomon? Again, it's God. God is the source of wisdom. And yes, I know this might feel like a bit of a, yeah, we get it, John. We're at church. God is the answer. Water is wet. Let's keep going. But it really is crucial to dig down deep onto this point. God being the answer to the question is kind of the only one that shows up all three times to these three different questions. God is always the answer as we go seeking. And it's really important to note that because this is getting back to that knowledge of self and knowledge of God and seeing how the two conflict. And as we think about ourselves and as we think about the world that we've made, how wise does our world seem to you? Small and large, things that impact only a few of us or all of us, institutions, politics, people in general, all the different things that you can find out there in the world. How much wisdom do you see on display these days? And for those who have really examined human history, is that today or is that all the time? How often are our much rumored and rarely seen better angels winning the war against our harsh, bitter, mean-spirited, or just plain dumb selves? If we're talking about being wise, if we're talking about the source of wisdom, God is the source of wisdom, we also have to acknowledge that we tend to be foolish. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was deeply involved in the fight against apartheid in South Africa 40 years ago. And as he was talking about wisdom and talking about seeking the source of things, he once wrote, "There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river and we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in." In order to really discover how we become wise, we need to know, why are we all such idiots? And the Bible gives us an answer. It's deep, it's theological, you really have to think through it hard, and here's how it goes. Sin makes you stupid. That's the Bible's answer on this question. Why are we all idiots? Sin makes us stupid. Theologians, of course, we have a much more verbose phrase to make sure that we sound plenty intelligent when we're talking about this idea. We call it the noetic effects of sin. Don't you just feel a little bit smarter having heard those? But it boils down to sin makes us stupid. Or if you want the more biblical word, sin makes us foolish. Sin makes us foolish. It drives us away from the right side. It says that the Bible says our minds are darkened by sin. We can't see straight because of sin. And as anyone who has overindulged in alcohol will tell you, when you can't see straight, it becomes a whole lot harder to not act foolishly. Sin acts like an intoxicant for our hearts. It makes us stupid. And so we need to be free from sin if we are going to become wise. And we're left with the question, how do we do that? And this is one of those great places where we as Christians have more information than Solomon did when he was writing this. Because we know that one day Jesus would come. And he would say, I'm going to live a perfect life. I'm going to never be foolish. I'm going to not earn the rewards of your foolish decisions. But I'm then going to die, and I'm going to take what you deserve from your foolish decisions. I'm going to take it on me, death being the ultimate consequence there. I'm going to take that on me, even though I don't deserve it, and I'm going to give you the fruit of a perfectly wise life, so that you can put that on you. Like Paul talks about, like we take off our filthy robes that are the things we earn and we deserve. It's the results of our bad decisions. And we get to put on Jesus' perfect robe. We get to live in God's eyes as if we had lived that perfectly wise life that none of us can actually live. And so we get to have our relationship with God start to be restored. We need to accept that before we can start finding wisdom, because we need that right relationship so that we can start getting to the source of wisdom, which is God. And so, as we all know as Christians, being freed from those sins, no longer being enslaved to them, means that everything is great right away. We're never dumb ever again. No one is ever foolish in the church. We no longer feel the pull of sin. We can immediately start being wise in every single way. The relational drama goes away. Everything is perfect. I have a line right in here that says, "Why are you all chuckling?" But not enough people are laughing. I'm just being silly. I'm being unserious. This isn't how it works. It doesn't all get fixed right away, right? For all of us who are Christians, even if you've been a Christian 50, 60, 70 years, you know you're not perfect yet. None of us are perfect yet. We still make foolish decisions sometimes. We can go to the source, but we are still only able to truly absorb it little by little. We only change one little bit at a time. We have to find wisdom over time. Again, we as theologians have a great big word for this that we use to remind you that we paid to go to school for this stuff. And that word is sanctification. It's the idea of becoming more like Jesus, of becoming more, in the terms of our passage this morning, wise, of knowing God and ourselves more and more. And as we read about sanctification in the Bible, we realize it's not a light bulb. It's not just something that's, boom, I'm done, I'm perfect, I'm good to go, let's move on with life. It's more like a thermostat where you go up degree by degree. I was having trouble with my analogy here. Maybe it's more like a thermostat that sets off a light bulb at some point. Let me use a couple of different illustrations. We have a book at home that I read to the kids. It's a board book we've had. I think we got it at a baby shower when Theo was born. And it's like a daddy and me book. It has a daddy bear and a baby bear, and they're going around doing all their things throughout the day. And there's this catchphrase in it that I really like, where every time they reach a challenge, it says that baby bear tried and tried and tried and tried with the daddy bear encouraging him, and it keeps saying, and all of a sudden, he found that he could. And all of a sudden, he found that he could. As for the kids and the parents and grandparents out there, here's one for all of us who like funny things out there. Ernest Hemingway, famous author, went broke late in his life. And a reporter ran up to him and said, Mr. Hemingway, how did you go broke? And Hemingway's answer was, gradually. And then suddenly. I really like that. When I read that quote, I was like, boy, if that isn't sanctification, I don't know what is. Gradually and gradually and gradually, and then, hey, I actually am better. Like, God is making real progress in my life. I once heard that salvation is surrender. We have to say, I can't do this, God, I need your help. I have to give up my pretensions of being able to handle all of this on my own. But then sanctification is war. We are fighting against the ties of sin that are still holding on to us. We are fighting against the patterns and habits and the brokenness of the world around us that would pull us back. And if sanctification is war, then it's a war where we are fighting and fighting. We are in the trenches against sin and evil, foolishness and our own stupidity. And then all of a sudden, dawn breaks. and there's the ceasing of hostilities. We don't find wisdom instantly. There is a reason that Proverbs urges the hearers to seek wisdom in the words of their fathers and mothers, because those with experience typically, not always, but typically, those who have had more hard-won lessons in their life are able to dispense more and more of what God has given to them. It's something that we don't find instantly, but then all of a sudden we have it. Because when we're pushing in the right direction, when our eyes are fixed on God, then our fighting has a direction. Our repeated efforts have a place that they're going. I recently read a novel where there was a character who was really frustrated with having to seemingly fight the same battles over and over in life. They yelled out in frustration, "Why do I keep learning the same lessons? Can't I ever make progress for once?" And his wiser companion turned to him and said, "You aren't relearning, you're reinforcing." We need to be learning the lessons over and over because we're reinforcing them in our hearts. We can't learn the lessons all at once. In fact, in Proverbs 1, verses 28 through 31, it describes people who in the moment of crisis have realized they needed wisdom. They've gone through their whole lives, they haven't cultivated it all, but in this crisis moment they say, "Oh boy, we're in trouble. We need help. Let's get the wisdom right now that we need." And Proverbs says they won't find it. Because wisdom can't be learned all at once. It can't just be, boom, I'm done, I'm wise, go. Because it's not just about our rational brain assenting to the right information, having the right answers for everything. It's about teaching our hearts, our gut responses in life, to believe those things that we know in our head are true and to act like it. And that takes time and work and hurt and effort. Sanctification is the reinforcement of all those crucial lessons in life over and over until one day you realize that you're the one God is sending people to in order for them to be reinforced in their faith and for them to grow in their wisdom. You're that father or mother in the faith, regardless of your age. And when that happens, when wisdom becomes a constant companion in life, not when you're perfect, that won't happen on this side of eternity, but when you start living in wisdom's light, what does that look like? What changes? What happens when we live wisely? We're going to hit 4 outcomes here, but do it very, very briefly. So we're not going to go deep on any of them. If one of them sparks something in your heart and you want to talk to me in the next couple of weeks, call the church office, text me, email me. Let's get together and talk about it. So let's dive in real briefly this morning. What are some things that change when our lives become characterized by wisdom? First, we grow. It's kind of a simple one here, but we grow, interestingly, as we look at 1 Kings and at Proverbs 1, we grow in areas that we typically connect to wisdom, but also some areas that we maybe wouldn't normally connect. In Proverbs 1, 2, and 3, it is addressed to those who seek to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. There's some of those words that we are used to being connected to wisdom and some that we're maybe less so. We're used to the idea of instruction, insight, wise dealing as a part of wisdom. Those are the part of wisdom that are reflected in the famous saying that intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit and wisdom is knowing not to put it in the fruit salad. Or, as the comedy author Terry Pratchett has put it a little more colorfully, knowing that all mushrooms are edible, but some mushrooms are edible only once. So we're used to kind of that side of wisdom, just knowing what's going on in the world, being able to apply wisdom, knowledge to the situation we're in. But there's an interesting second half here in the verse. Did you hear it? It said that part of wisdom is receiving instruction in righteousness, justice, and equity. And that makes total sense if the motive for seeking wisdom isn't just me. It isn't just to be smarter than somebody else, but instead is other people centered. To be a good leader, a good parent, a good friend, a good follower. If that's our motivation, then why wouldn't we want wisdom to be a part of that? To be learning what righteousness is so that we know how to live rightly in the eyes of God and in ways that direct others to look at Him. to be learning what divine justice looks like and how to be someone who pursues justice in our communities, in our relationships, to learn how to treat everyone rightly and equally in the eyes of God. Wisdom is both knowing not to put the tomatoes in the fruit salad and noticing and knowing who needs the fruit salad because they're hungry, and having the courage to cross whatever cultural barrier would stand between us and that person in need. Leaving that very forced tomato salad analogy there, we're going to keep moving quickly. Second, if we're growing in wisdom, we begin to see others more clearly. And we see this one very quickly in the immediate follow-up to that story of Solomon in 1 Kings 3. The next story we get there in 1 Kings 3 is the story of two prostitutes who come to him with a quandary. And isn't it interesting that it explicitly notes that they're prostitutes? As if it immediately, the Bible wants to say, wisdom isn't just for connecting to the intelligent and the well-to-do. It is to be used for the benefit of even the lowliest and even the sinners in the society. Anyway, the two prostitutes come to Solomon and they say, both of us had babies at roughly the same time. In the night last night, one of the babies died and one of them lived. And both of the women are claiming the living baby is mine, the dead baby is the other woman's. And he's trying to figure out, okay, how do we tell what's going on here? And in the story, it says that Solomon summons to get a sword brought to himself. And he says, we'll take the sword, we will cut the child in half, and you will each get half of the baby. The real mother shrieks. She's frightened. She says, no, give the baby to the other woman. I would rather have him live and never see him again than have him die. The other woman is more apathetic, therefore obviously revealing who the real mother is. Solomon, who never intended to harm the child in the first place, returns the child to his real mother. And the lesson we get here is that if we're growing in wisdom, we're going to see people more clearly. We're going to see their motives more clearly. We're going to see their desires and their fears, their needs and their hearts. And remember, our motive in this matters. We aren't seeing things more clearly so that we can take advantage of people or lord our knowledge over them. We're seeing them more clearly so that we can love them better. We're seeing them more clearly so we can help them better. We're seeing them more clearly so that we know, because we know ourselves and we see ourselves in them. We see the way we're connected as human beings, and so that we can effectively call them to God's truth. Speaking of motives, third, if we're growing in wisdom, we are given other good things. But there needs to be an asterisk on this one. Only if we're not doing it, only if we're not growing in wisdom to get those other good things. Let me briefly explain here. In Solomon's story, God says, Solomon, because you have asked for wisdom, because you have been selfless in your love of your people and what you've asked of me, I will give you also the worldly blessings that you might have asked for and received otherwise. Wealth, long life, peace, etc. And I think we often see this happen in our lives as Christians too. Whereas as we put God in the right place in his lives, everything else starts lining up better. Those things that we struggled on holding up so high in our lives before and that we were trembling with the effort, we get to lower them back down into the right place and maybe find some rest in doing that. And the things that we had neglected and left to the side get pulled back out and put into their right place in our lives. And things start lining up well, and things start making sense, and things start connecting with each other. And there is a real temptation here, because we can start to feel like, we can start to be tempted to say, doing the right thing, being wise, growing in wisdom gets me all these good things, and I like all these good things. And so I'm going to do the right thing to get all these extra things in life. Let me offer a quick example. One of the things that I end up counseling people about the most in the church is people who are struggling with a form of this that I call the Reformed prosperity gospel. So the prosperity gospel says God wants you to be happy, healthy, wise, etc., and if you do all the right things, then you'll have all of those. And if you're unhappy or you're sick or you're this, that, and the other, if you're poor, it means you aren't loving God enough or you aren't giving enough money to certain ministries or this, that, and the other. But for us as Reformed Christians, we have a version of this that we do in our hearts a little bit too, where we say, I'm going to do all the right things in my marriage, and God will make sure that we don't hit hiccups. I'm going to do all the right things with my kids, and they'll keep walking with the Lord, and they'll have good careers, and they won't have problems moving forward. And this, that, and the other. We have this way of, we pick I will say, I think we tend to pick better things to put on those pedestals, but we still put them on the pedestals. And we say, I'm going to be wise, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow in God so that I get these good things. And there's this terrible irony here in the passage where we are given other good things, but if it becomes about getting the other good things, it can actually poison them. And it can make them to where they start being bad things to us. So we have to keep our eyes focused on God and be appreciative of and grateful for the side blessings that He's giving to us. But remember what the main thing is. And that's our fourth and final point this morning. The final blessing we get from growing in wisdom is that we get to know God's heart. Keeping God centered. Remember, we said keeping God at the center is the only thing that is a part of all three answers this morning. In Proverbs 1, verse 23, it promises that those who listen to God's voice, who seek His wisdom, it says, I will pour out my Spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. We get to know God. And as we grow in wisdom, a part of growing in wisdom is realizing that all of the other benefits that we can get can be good, wonderful, beautiful things, and also they're just side benefits compared to that one, compared to getting to know Him better. Amy Carmichael was a missionary to India, and she wrote, "Blessed are the single-hearted, those focused on God, because they will enjoy peace. If you refuse to be hurried and pressed, if you stay your soul on God, then nothing can keep you from that clearness of spirit, which is life and peace. And in the stillness, you know what His will is." This is, keeping our eyes focused on God, is how we can find peace and rest as Christians in a restless age. So just summarizing, where does wisdom come from? It comes from God and developing a heart for others. How do we find wisdom? By seeking God, finding Him in Jesus, and growing in our connection to Him over time. And what does that growing connection look like? It looks like seeing others clearly, receiving blessings from God, but knowing that all of those blessings are secondary next to as Paul put it, the surpassing joy and worth of knowing Christ Jesus as our Lord. Would you pray with me?